Hello, I'm Gordon, callsign Whiskey 4 Zulu Delta. As an amateur radio operator, or as we say ham, I've exchanged a number of QSL cards with other hams throughout the world. But about 25 years ago, when the online QSL services came into existence, I pretty much quit using the physical cards. I recently got my collection out and started to recall how much fun it was. I wanted to share this with my local club and presented a talk in April of 2024. What follows is a video version of that discussion. If you're new to ham radio, or you're unsure about how to exchange QSL cards, then I think that this video will help you get started on this rather fun aspect of the hobby.
Today, I want to talk primarily about QSL cards. These are paper postcards sent to confirm a radio contact or reception. But a QSL could also mean an electronic or internet-based confirmation, as these have become fairly common over the last 20 years or so. QSL cards can be used for any contact, but are most common for long-distance contacts on the HF bands, that is about 1.8 to 30 megahertz, or 10 meters through 160 meters. The name QSL comes from a set of three-letter codes, the Q codes, which were first used by telegraph operators as shorthand abbreviations for some common exchanges. Q codes were standardized in 1912 and adopted internationally in 1913. Like all QSL codes, on the radio, QSL can be used as a question, "Did you receive me?" or as a statement, "Yes, I copied you okay." The practice of sending QSL confirmations occurred alongside the early development of commercial, governmental, and amateur radio. In the first quarter of the last century, when radio broadcasting was still in its infancy, sometimes listeners to broadcast stations would send a letter to the station with a reception report, informing them of their distance from the station and the quality of the signal. Usually the station staff would send back a letter or postcard, such as this one from 1932, acknowledging their reception of the broadcast. In the field of amateur radio, one of the first mentions of using the mail to confirm radio contacts is this mentioned in the February 1916 issue of QST magazine from the American Radio Relay League, also called the ARRL. Here the reader was encouraged to, quote, "drop the owner a postal and tell him so," whenever they received a distant station. There is also a letter published in the June 16 issue from Edward Andrews, who expressed how much he appreciated getting mail from W.T. Fraser, station 8VX, informing him that his signal was picked up 400 miles away. Both he and the editor suggested continuing this practice, and as it did, the postal cards became known as QSL cards. One common reason to collect QSL cards is for credit toward operating awards, such as this ARRL award for working 100 or more different DX countries. DX is shorthand for distance, and chasing DX, or DXing, refers to an operator trying to contact distant stations in different countries, and especially those which present a challenge because of greater distance and or a scarcity of operators. By the way, in this context, the word countries refers to a list of distinctive geographic and political entities known as the DXCC list. Some entries on this list are not what you might commonly think of as a country. In fact, a few are little more than a remote and unpopulated island. Because of the way DXCC countries are defined, Alaska and Hawaii are considered separate entities from the United States on the DXCC list. It's often said that the final courtesy of a contact is a QSL card. In part, this is because prior to the internet, having QSL cards from other stations in your possession was the best evidence of your radio skill and the primary verification of contacts made. When you receive a card, it is usually marked "Please QSL" if they want your card, or "Thanks QSL" if they already have your card. The exchange of paper QSL cards has declined for a number of reasons, so it's a good idea to set some guidelines and try to send cards primarily to those operators who want them. There are many ways to send QSL confirmations, or we can say many different QSL routes. Nowadays, many hams are using electronic or online QSLs such as eQSL and the ARRL Logbook of the World. That's fine, they have many advantages, but physical cards add something special which cannot be duplicated with the online services. It's more of a personal connection. So with that in mind, let's put off talking about QSLing online for now. With QSL cards, there are some elements which are universal. Always included are the specifics about the contact, including your call, the call sign of the other station, the frequency or the band, a signal report, and the date and time using UTC Standard Time. Beyond that, there is plenty of opportunity to make a card unique. I have received QSL cards from 123 different countries, and I really enjoy seeing what part of the world they come from. Many have a photo or a design that reflects something in their history or culture. Every time I get a card from a new place, it sparks my curiosity, and I always end up going online to see what else I can discover. Some of my favorite cards are those that somehow make a personal connection. Sometimes it is a photo of the operator, a face to put with the voice on the radio. Other times it is some tidbit of information about their lives. Many hams also include a mention of awards they have earned, or club and association memberships. And by the way, if you're designing your own card, keep in mind how vastly different some cultures are from your own, and don't include anything that might be considered objectionable. One great example of a personalized card is this one from my collection, which shows Christian LX1KC at his operating position in 1999. He has many awards and QSL cards on display. Here is a photo of Christian some years later, sitting at his radio with a wall full of QSL cards in the background, many of which have quite unique designs. This is a great example of what we call QSL wallpaper. Let me show you a few more of my cards, which recently reminded me of the fun of QSLing. I still recall my conversation with Tony in New Zealand, ZL1ATE. He included a personal handwritten note on his card and added, "Thanks for the $1." You see, I had sent him $1 to cover his postage cost. I'll talk more about sending money later. Here's another handwritten note which was so nice to get, this one on a card from Yugoslavia in August of 1990. This card is dated March 1993. Both this card and the one before it came from places which were in Yugoslavia in 1990. But in 1993, Yugoslavia was no more. In the roughly 3 years between these two contacts, the country of Yugoslavia broke up into independent states. The location for the prior QSL was now in the country of Croatia, and the location that this card came from had become Slovenia. The operator still used his Yugoslavian QSL card, but with a label specifying Republic of Slovenia in the call S57CW. So here we see a bit of history as reflected in a pair of QSL cards from my collection. The breakup of Yugoslavia was a violent one, but in the same general time period, the country of Czechoslovakia peacefully split into two countries, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. This card, from the newly created Slovakia, was for a contact only 65 days after this split. This card, for a stateside contact, came unexpectedly and got my attention for its design. When I got the card, I recalled that the operator was a well-spoken young woman. QRZ, or QRZ.com, is a kind of universal online directory of hams. I checked the QRZ page for this ham and found out that she was only 12 years old, and also that she had 3 cats. I wanted to send a card back, but I didn't have any of my own cards at the time. Well, the website radioqth.net came to my rescue with a QSL card creator feature where you can design and print a single QSL card. I created one card and mailed it with a note telling her how skilled she sounded on the radio. This card is from the Museum Battleship Iowa, which is moored at the Los Angeles Harbor. NEPM is its military call sign. This card was for a cross-band operation with NEPM in which they were transmitting on a military frequency and listening for a reply from hams in the amateur band. This type of cross-band operation requires prior governmental approvals. Along with the QSL card for the contact, I also got a fold-out card from the Battleship Iowa Amateur Radio Association. This group works with the Pacific Battleship Center, which is the organization which manages the ship. This card details some of the history of the ship. It is the first 6-page fold-out QSL card that I had ever seen. I also have a few cards and a few online QSLs from hobbyists called shortwave listeners, or SWLs. Many hams were SWLs before they got their amateur radio license. In the spirit of international goodwill, I see no reason not to reciprocate with a QSL card from a DX SWL. These 125 cards from my collection are each from a different DXCC country. They remind me of the enjoyment of learning about our fellow hams throughout the world. Other reasons that you might want to QSL include competing for awards, helping others accomplish their operating goals, and spreading international goodwill. So let's look at some of the essential things about QSLing that you should know to be successful. Except in some special circumstances, hams in the United States have not been legally required to keep a log since 1983. But most do, and you probably keep a log already. If not, then I strongly suggest that you start logging your contacts, at least for the HF bands. And it should be a computerized log. Your log should include the location you are transmitting from, whether it is your home station or someplace else. Most awards and some radio contests base the scoring on the location of the stations. Also, many hams enjoy the challenge of making contacts with as many different locations as they can. These locations might be recorded as the state, county, or Maidenhead grid square. Grid squares, by the way, are rectangular areas of the Earth designated by latitude and longitude. Further, if you change calls, then your log should reflect the dates when a call was first used and when it was last used. Backing up your log is essential. My biggest regret in this hobby is losing my old logs. I now use a system with multiple backups, both on-site and off-site. The online logbook services can also serve as a backup. That's an option I did not have when I lost track of my log. If you take nothing else from this talk, remember that a lifetime log is worth keeping. There are many suitable computer programs for logging. A few of the more popular ones are Amateur Contact Log by N3FJP, Logger32, Log4OM, also known as Log for Old Man, WinLog32, the Ham Radio Deluxe package, and DXKeeper, part of the DX Lab suite. These programs can track your sent and received QSLs, and they include some additional features to make QSLing easier. Some can print mailing labels, and they usually interface to online QSL services. Recall that when I was talking about the DXCC list, I mentioned that some of the places on the list were remote and perhaps unpopulated. With little or no regular amateur radio activity, contacts with these DXCC entities are scarce. That is until hams make an expedition, what we call a DXpedition, and set up a temporary station. A rare DX station or a DXpedition might have tens of thousands of contacts in a short period of time. Instead of taking on the work of QSLing themselves, they often turn to a QSL manager who is usually a volunteer ham. The manager does all of the log checking, mailing, and other administrative duties for QSL confirmations on behalf of another station. If the other station uses a manager, QSL through him or her. For sending or receiving physical cards, one might say QSL Direct. This means it's okay to send your card through the mail to the other station using direct postal mail. Other routing options include going through a manager or an organization called a bureau, as well as various online methods. It's always best to use the QSL routes or methods that the other station tells you they prefer. There are many ways to find out the best QSL route. My first stop is usually QRZ.com. Most DX stations and DXpeditions will put QSL information on their QRZ page. There's also a section on the Details tab for operators to state whether or not they use 3 common QSL routes, assuming that the operator enters this data. Another good source is the weekly ARRL DX Bulletin, which is available via email and on the ARRL website. Some DXpeditions and other operators will have their own website where you can find out how to QSL with them. There are many more information sources online. For some things, a payment is required, and many of the sites end up having duplicate information. As a rule, direct mail is the fastest way to send a physical QSL card, and the odds are pretty good that you will get one in reply if you also send a self-addressed envelope with a stamp or other payment to cover the postal cost. For stations in the same country as you, it's easy to put a stamp on the envelope. But what is the best way to reimburse a DX station for their postal expense? In the past, I sometimes used an International Reply Coupon, or IRC. This is a voucher which can be exchanged for enough postage to send an airmail letter. IRCs can be used in every country which is a member of the Universal Postal Union. It used to be common to send an IRC to a DX station to cover the cost of return postage, but IRCs have not been sold in the United States since 2013. Still, if a non-expired IRC is presented at a U.S. post office, they must honor it. Chances are that if you are a U.S. ham, you will never see an IRC, but they still can be purchased from foreign merchants. This is the current IRC, and the design is by a 15-year-old girl from Belarus. It will be sold through the end of 2025. Green stamp is slang for a U.S. dollar bill. Recall that the QSL card I got in 1990 from ZL1ATE included a note of thanks for my sending him $1. Back then, $1 covered the postage for him to send a card to me from New Zealand. But in 2024, postal costs have increased, and DX stations now usually want between $2 and $4 US. The practice of sending cash to amateur radio operators is well known, and theft does occur sometimes. To reduce the risk of theft, it's a good idea to leave call signs off the envelope. Put cash inside the return envelope, which in turn goes inside the outgoing envelope. Use tape on the flap and on the corners. Some countries may restrict the possession of United States currency, so you should check to see if the DX station advises against sending green stamps. Let me pause here to remind ourselves that by law and by convention, ham radio is not a business. Once in a while, you might find an operator who is asking for more payment than seems legitimate to cover the cost of sending you a QSL card, perhaps even to make a profit from his amateur radio activity. Luckily, this is not common, but you should be aware of the possibility. Do not send more than is reasonable for return postage. If the DX station is asking for money to help pay for a de-expedition, a radio repair, or something like that, then if you wish to help, donate for that separately and without using ham radio for communication. As I mentioned before, many DX stations and managers do not want you to send your card, nor do they want to deal with foreign currency. Instead, they might ask you to cover their postal costs by sending a little money online, for example, via PayPal. This can be a good way to send a DX station funds for postage while eliminating your expense for a pair of envelopes and the outgoing postage. I recently used this option to request a card and send $4 via PayPal. However, PayPal has a foreign currency fee, which is a percentage with a $1 minimum, so it actually cost me $5 to send $4. Is it worth it? Well, that's up to you. One popular version of this is an online QSL request system hosted at clublog.org. After the DX station or their manager uploads their log, you can check to verify your contact with them. If you are in their log, you will have an opportunity to request a QSL card and send money directly to the station or manager using PayPal. It's much like online shopping. Your card will be sent direct or via the QSL Bureau. I'll talk about the Bureau next. The direct route should not be more than a few dollars. The Bureau option will either be free or $1. A QSL Bureau collects and bundles QSL cards that are intended for stations in other countries from a large number of hams, then forwards them in bulk. This greatly reduces the postal cost, but it also increases the time it takes for delivery. QSL Bureaus were created by the International Amateur Radio Union and established after World War II. This was long before the Internet, and finding out where to send a card was a challenge. When they did exist, directories of hams called call books were expensive and often hard to obtain. In the United States, the ARRL manages the Outgoing QSL Bureau. Most other countries have similar operations or bureaus under the auspices of the National Amateur Radio Association. Not long ago, the ARRL Bureau collected and forwarded over 1 million cards each year from U.S. hams. But with online logging, fewer cards are going through the QSL Bureau now. Still, the Bureau handled about 300,000 cards in 2021. You can see the ARRL Outgoing Bureau in this video. To use the ARRL Outgoing Bureau, you must be an ARRL member. There is an additional small fee required. Using the Outgoing QSL Bureau, you can send cards to DX stations for as little as 13 to 15 cents each, not including the cost to send your cards to the Bureau. To effectively use the ARRL Outgoing QSL Bureau, there is quite a bit more you need to know, but it is all well documented on the ARRL website. Some useful links are in the description. An incoming QSL Bureau is the counterpart to an outgoing QSL Bureau. In the U.S., there are actually 15 separate bureaus under the ARRL umbrella. There is one for each numbered call area, plus one for Hawaii, Alaska, Puerto Rico, and Guam. Outgoing bureaus in other countries sort and ship cards destined for U.S. hams based on the number in their call. Incoming cards for hams with a 4 in their call go to the Area 4 Incoming Bureau, except for some which are assigned outside of the mainland of the U.S. Except for those exceptions, it does not matter where a ham lives. If a ham lives in California or Oregon, for example, and has a 4 in his call, then the QSL cards for him go to the Area 4 Bureau. If one does live in Area 4 but has a call with another number, then they use that bureau. For example, if your call is WB2WZC, then you would use the Area 2 Bureau, which is in New Jersey. You do not need to be a member of the ARRL to use the Incoming Bureau, but you do need to set up an account with the Bureau. The account could be a money account, or it could mean providing the Bureau with envelopes and return postage. Personally, I would suggest that anyone who is even a little active on the HF bands set up an account with the Incoming Bureau, because eventually cards will be sent to you via the Bureau whether you ask for them or not. If you have not made prior arrangements, then the card will eventually be thrown in the trash. The standard procedure is only to keep cards for 90 days when there is no account set up, although some letter managers may keep them longer. Most of the time, the bureaus would like to know if you don't want any cards at all so that they don't need to store them. So exactly how does all this work, and how do you get started? First, the national organizations in other countries, similar to the ARRL, provide their own outgoing bureaus. These outgoing bureaus receive QSL cards from the members and ship them in bulk to incoming QSL bureaus in the U.S., either to the AARL or to one of the 15 aforementioned numbered bureaus. Each of the 15 incoming bureaus has a number of volunteer card letter managers or card sorters. They handle the forwarding of the cards based on the first letter of the suffix. In other words, cards for K4AYZ will go to the letter A manager, and cards to K4BYZ will go to the B letter manager. The card manager will keep envelopes on file for the recipients. Sometimes these are self-addressed stamped envelopes sent in by the hams who expect to get cards. In other cases, the letter manager will keep a cash account with the recipients and prepare the envelopes and postage as needed. When he gets a stack of incoming cards, the letter manager will put the cards in envelopes for each separate call, and when the weight of the envelope is near the maximum for the included postage, the envelope is mailed. Or perhaps if enough time has passed or a request is made, the envelope is mailed before it is full. To get started, first go to the ARRL website and find the listing for your call area bureau. Next, go to the website for your call area bureau and read about their procedures, or contact the bureau manager at the listed email for direction on how to proceed. If the letter manager for your call suffix is listed, you could also contact him or her directly. Keep in mind that procedures will vary. Some will accept SASEs, while others prefer to use their own supplies and will only use cash or credit accounts. Also, some bureaus provide an online search where you can see if you have cards waiting on you or to find out how much credit you have. However, this data is sporadic and often not up to the minute. Follow the instructions of the bureau and letter managers to set up your incoming QSL bureau account. Pay attention to details concerning SASE envelope preparation, where to mail them, etc. Remember that this is an all-volunteer undertaking, so work with them and do as they request. Once you have your account set up and on file, be patient. From the sending station to the outgoing and incoming bureaus to the card sorters, at each step cards are held until a sufficient number are collected to justify the shipping expense. You usually will not receive a card for 12 to 24 months or more after a contact. This last slide is specifically about the Area 4 Call Bureau, which is run by the Sterling Park Amateur Radio Club in Sterling, Virginia. It includes 39 volunteers who reside in multiple states. In the past, they shared the bureau duties with the Carolina DX Association, or CDXA, in Charlotte, North Carolina. Prior to March 2022, Sterling Park handled QSL cards for Area 4 calls with 2 letters in the prefix, and the CDXA processed the rest. Now Sterling Park handles it all. However, the letter managers are still divided into 52 total groups, allocated according to whether the prefix is 1 character or 2. In other words, KA4 calls and K4 calls are assigned to different letter managers unless the volunteer wants to do both. The CDXA still maintains the online list of letter managers for your reference. The Area 4 Incoming QSL Bureau lists 3 options for setting up your account. First, they will accept your SASEs, which are sent directly to the Sterling Park Club. But in this case, they will need to forward the envelopes to the letter managers. Usually that is done by mail. So it makes sense to send your envelopes directly to the manager as long as he or she agrees to that. The website details the specifics for preparing your envelopes, including the required size. It's always a good idea to use forever stamps to avoid coming up short in postage if the rates increase. Also, peel and stick envelope flaps are preferred because the ones with adhesive that needs to be moistened often become sticky in humid environments. The Bureau will also accept cash or check payments made directly to the club. The cost is $1 per envelope. The third option is to set up a money account with the letter managers. The manager then handles the preparation of the envelopes and the postage. Not all managers do cash accounts. However, roughly half of the letter managers prefer to use cash accounts according to the list kept by the CDXA. You will need to work with the letter manager directly to set up a money account. Most people should probably send 2 envelopes, or funds for 2 envelopes. Usually postage for 2 ounces on each envelope is good, but if you expect very few cards, 1 ounce might be sufficient. Heavy DXers should use postage for 3 ounces, but no more. The letter managers will include a notation with your last envelope so that you know when to send more, and in the case of cash accounts, they should let you know when more is needed. If you change call signs, or if you are a QSL manager for another ham, then you should have a separate envelope for each call. Considering how long it can take for cards to arrive, I would suggest keeping envelopes on file for 2 to 5 years from the time you no longer use or manage the old call.
So that is my presentation. I hope that you found it helpful. The links I mentioned are in the description. If you have any helpful comments, suggestions, or corrections, leave them in the comments section. And if you catch me on the air, be sure and ask for my QSL card.